Hello, and welcome back to the Southern Bible Thumper channel. For today's upload, we will be reading Exodus chapter 34. And the Lord said unto Moses, Hew thee 2 tables of stone like unto the first, and I will write upon these tables the words that were in the first table which thou breakest. And be ready in the morning, and come up in the morning unto Mount Sinai, and present thyself there to me in the top of the mount. And no man shall come up with thee, neither let any man be seen throughout all the mount. Neither let the flocks nor herds feed before that mount. And he hewed 2 tables of stone like unto the first. And Moses rose up early in the morning, and went up unto Mount Sinai, as the Lord had commanded him, and took in his hand the 2 tables of stone. And the Lord descended in the cloud, and stood with him there, and proclaimed the name of the Lord. And the Lord passed by before him, and proclaimed, The Lord God, merciful and gracious, long-suffering, and abundant in goodness and truth, keeping mercy for thousands, forgiving iniquity, and transgression, and sin, and that will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children, and upon the children's children, unto the third and to the fourth generation. And Moses made haste, and bowed his head toward the earth, and worshipped. And he said, If now I have found grace in thy sight, O Lord, let my Lord pray thee, go among us, for it is a stiff-necked people, and pardon our iniquity and our sin, and take us for thine inheritance. And he said, Behold, I make a covenant. Before all thy people I will do marvels, such as have not been done in all earth, nor in any nation. And all the people among which thou art shall see the work of the Lord, for it is a terrible thing that I will do with thee. Observe thou that which I command thee this day. Behold, I drive out before thee the Amorite, and the Canaanite, and the Hittite, and the Perizzite, and the Hivite, and the Jebusite. Take heed to thyself, lest thou make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land whither thou goest, lest it be for a snare in the midst of thee. But ye shall destroy their altars, break their images, and cut down their groves. For thou shalt worship no other God, for the Lord, whose name is jealous, is a jealous God, lest thou make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land, and they go a whoring after their gods, and do sacrifice unto their gods, and one call thee, and thou eat of his sacrifice, and thou take of their daughters unto thy sons, and their daughters go a whoring after their gods, and make thy sons go a whoring after their gods. Thou shalt make thee no molten gods. The feast of unleavened bread shalt thou keep. 7 days thou shalt eat unleavened bread, as I commanded thee, in the time of the month Abib. For in the month Abib thou camest out from Egypt. All that openeth the matrix is mine, and every firstling among any cattle, whether ox or sheep, that is male. But the firstling of an ass thou shalt redeem with the lamb, and if thou redeem him not, then shalt thou break his neck. All the firstborn of thy sons shalt thou redeem, and none shall appear before me empty. 6 days thou shalt work, but on the 7th day thou shalt rest. In earing time and in harvest thou shalt rest. And thou shalt observe the feast of weeks, of the firstfruits of wheat harvest, and the feast of ingathering at the year's end. Thrice in the year shall all your men children appear before the Lord God and the Lord of Israel. For I will cast out the nations before thee, and enlarge thy borders. Neither shall any man desire thy land, when thou shalt go up to appear before the Lord thy God thrice in the year. Thou shalt not offer the blood of my sacrifice with leaven, neither shall the sacrifice of the feast of the Passover be left unto the morning. The first of the firstfruits of thy land thou shalt bring unto the house of the Lord thy God. Thou shalt not see the kid and his mother's milk. And the Lord said unto Moses, Write thou these words, for after the tenor of these words I have made a covenant with thee and with Israel. And he was there with the Lord 40 days and 40 nights. He did neither eat bread nor drink water. And he wrote upon the tables the words of the covenant, the 10 Commandments. And it came to pass, when Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the 2 tables of testimony in Moses' hand, when he came down from the mount, that Moses wist not that the skin of his face shone while he talked with him. And when Aaron and all the children of Israel saw Moses, behold, the skin of his face shone, and they were afraid to come nigh him. And Moses called unto him, and Aaron and all the rulers of the congregation returned unto him, and Moses talked with them. And afterward all the children of Israel came nigh, and he gave them in commandment all that the Lord had spoken with him in Mount Sinai. Until Moses had done speaking with them, he put a veil on his face. But when Moses went in before the Lord to speak with him, he took the veil off until he came out. And he came out and spake unto the children of Israel that which he was commanded. And the children of Israel saw the face of Moses, that the skin of Moses' face shone, and Moses put the veil upon his face again until he went in to speak with him. Summarizing Exodus chapter 34, God tells Moses to bring 2 tablets up for him to write his words on again, since Moses broke the first 2 in chapter 32, verse 19. God tells Moses to be ready in the early morning to meet him on Mount Sinai. Don't bring up anyone else, and don't let anyone else up on the mountain. Don't let animals near it. Moses followed God's directions, making the tablets and going up the mountain. The Lord descended, stood there, and proclaimed his own name. When I first read this, I was a little bit confused because I was not sure who was speaking, but the New Living Translation is the most accurate version. After reading this a few times and focusing on the verbs, I was able to come to the conclusion that this is what it is saying. The Lord came down, stood there with Moses, and called out his own name. When we look at the King James Version, we focus on the verbs. The Lord descended, the Lord stood, and the Lord proclaimed. The Lord is the subject of the sentence, and when we look at his relationship to the verbs, it lets us know who's speaking. That's how I was able to get through it anyway. So the next chapter, or not the next chapter, the next 2 verses, I just said it again. The next verse, verse 6 and verse 7, is God telling you who he is. He keeps steadfast love for thousands. He forgives iniquity and transgressions. He is telling, he is telling you who he is. Verse 8, Moses quickly bows his head and worships. And then he says to God, if I found favor in your sight, please let the Lord go in the midst of us. I know that these are a stiff-necked people. Pardon our iniquity, our obstinate, our sin, our wrongdoing, our sin, our iniquity. He asked God to forgive the Israelites for being so rebellious and to please claim them, including himself, claim us as your own special possession, God. God says in verse 10, behold, I'm making a covenant. I will do marvels, such as have never been created in the earth or any nation. All the people among you will see the work of the Lord, that it's an awesome thing I'll do with you. So, we have some of these. So we have the English Standard Version, awesome. New English, the New International Version, awesome. We have awe-inspiring in the Christian Standard Bible and the New Living Translation, awesome. But we also have in the King James Version, terrible. Terrible in this sense, meaning formidable in nature or awesome. And then here, fearful. There's one, yes, for a fearful thing for the New American Standard Bible. And fearful in this instant means intensive. In this instance means intensive. So next he says, observe what I command you. Take note. I will drive out 6 groups of people. Do not make a covenant. Do not make a treaty. Do not get into an agreement or an arrangement with these people, lest it become a snare in your midst. So Covenant and treaty both are defined as agreement, and agreement is defined as harmony of opinion, action, or character. It's also defined as a compact or a treaty. Compact meaning to make up by connecting or combining. Do not make a covenant, do not get into agreement with this group of people, lest it become a snare in your midst. Snare meaning a trap, something deceptively attractive. Verse 13, God is telling them, or telling Moses, that when you enter into this new land, you must tear down their altars, smash their sacred stones, cut down their Asherah poles. It says here, cut down their groves in the King James Version. But I thought Asherah poles, because this was groves, and because in the uh, a couple of chapters ago, we read about shittim wood and how that was used to create the tabernacle. So I was thinking this was some type of wood, and it kind of is. Asherah is a Canaanite goddess, and this is an example of what some of those poles looked like. They were carved out from trees. Um, there are some popular, or there's some depictions of her holding her breasts, sometimes depicted as pregnant, and this was supposed to represent fertility, but she was a Canaanite goddess. I stumbled onto this website, thattheworldmayknow.com. This person, Ray Vander Laan, is an accomplished theologist, and he's educated, and he wrote a very, very good article on the fertility cults of Canaan. I was able to learn about Asherah and Baal, and how Yahweh ended up getting sort of mixed into this when the Israelites began embracing the Canaanite laws, um, the Canaanite ways. And in Judges chapter 2, verse 10 and 13, the Israelites, there was a new generation. They were living in the land of Canaan, and they began to embrace some of this stuff. So, the theory here is that the Israelites were in the wilderness for a long time, entered the land of Canaan. Since they had not experienced harvests like that, they were persuaded by the Canaanites when they gave credit to their goddess Asherah as being the one who gave them this uh, bounty. So, another source that I read that I can't find again says that this got so convoluted that the Israelites, once they embraced this, these gods, it they started to become worshipped side by side. And speaking of that, there was another article that I stumbled on, and this is just an example of why it's so important to maintain traditions, why it's so important to maintain way of life and pass things down. Because the Israelites began to embrace these Canaanite gods, now we have, or this was in 2011, but it becomes easy to mix all these things together. What this article is, there's no evidence supporting this claim that God's wife was edited out of the Bible. There's no evidence claiming that, there's no evidence in this article that God had a wife. There's just no evidence of it. So the Book of Kings suggests that she was worshipped alongside Yahweh. And even if that's the case, that she was worshipped alongside him, that doesn't make her his wife, especially during this time when populations were conquered, the cultures would merge. So this is a theory, and there's an educated Oxford scholar that made this theory. She even says that it's spelled out in the Bible. See if I can find it again. Yeah, Asher's connection is spelled out in the Bible in 8th century BC. All they've been able to to prove is that she was a powerful goddess and she was influential, but they haven't been able to connect her and prove definitively, even with the scripture, that she was Yahweh's wife. But when we, if you, if you decide to read this, you'll see how it sort of pieces together. The Israelites began to embrace these gods and they just worship them alongside of Yahweh. And the first thing that was done in this article, you might know him as Yahweh, Allah, or God, but on this fact, Jews, Muslims, and Christians, the people of the great Abrahamic religions, agree there's only one of him. So putting everything on the same playing field, and I'm not here to say Christianity is better than one or the other, but doing this, it leads to it leads to not having the respect for these each individual belief systems that we should have. And, you know, we don't believe that we're all on the same page. We don't believe that we're all equal, which is why we're different groups. So, not keeping those traditions, it leads to the history getting muddled. To re-summarize, God tells Moses to cut the stones so he can rewrite his words on them, replace the old ones that Moses broke, told him to meet on the mountain the next day. God explains who he is. Moses worships him. Moses asks for God's protection. God tells Moses he'll make a covenant with them, performing awesome miracles. He'll also drive out the 6 groups of people. In verse 12, he tells Moses not to get into any types of agreements with these people, that the Israelites must reject their lifestyle and break down their images. He also says in verse 14, don't worship any god before other than me, because God is a jealous God. His name is jealous. And it says here in the New Living Translation, he's jealous about his relationship with you. Now, God created laws for us. He does not have to operate by the same laws that he gives his creation. But I also want to point out that jealousy was never something that God said we shouldn't have. Not saying it's a good thing to have, but what God said was, you shall not covet your neighbor's house. Covet means to wish for earnestly or to desire what belongs to another inordinately. Jealousy, on the other hand, means hostile towards a rival or vigilant in guarding a possession, disposed to suspect rivalry, intolerant of rivalry or unfaithfulness. So that's describing what God is. One thing that I really do appreciate about how the Bible is portraying God so far, this language is not prettying God up to make him look, to try to appeal to human sensibilities about who God is. One thing that the devil has to do all the time, or the enemy, he always has to create an elaborate ruse, an elaborate deception to make people want to choose him. For instance, with the Garden of Eden, Satan had to tell them something that would make them believe, believe that going against God was a good idea. He had to tell them, you'll be like gods. And they were like gods, knowing good and evil. It's a half truth. But he also didn't tell them they would have this unnatural fixation on their bodies from now on, that they would have to use creation in a way that God didn't create it to cover their bodies. They didn't tell them that. He didn't tell them that, like, it will interfere with their relationship with God, because they went to hide when God came. Because now that they're gods themselves, they can't handle the knowledge. So now they don't want to be in the presence of a real God when he comes. So also with the land of Canaan, the Israelites, once they got into this fertile land, they were giving these other gods credit. And instead of them being faithful to their God, they looked at the Canaanites' God, the Asherim, and they don't have to adhere to strict sexual rules. They don't have to wait till they're married to have sex. They can do whatever over there. And all you have to do, what is this morality that God is telling you, your God is telling you to be moral? What is that getting you? Look at all the wealth we have over here, and we didn't have to adhere to any rules. The devil always has to make his choice look really, really appealing without letting you know about the downside. Whereas God will just tell you, look, I'm jealous. Look, I killed everyone with the flood. I made a rainbow to promise you I'll never do it again, but yeah, I did that. He owns up to it. And he made us in his image. He said he's jealous. He owns his jealousy, and he made us in his image. You know, verse 15. Lest you make a covenant with the inhabitants, and when they whore after their gods and sacrifice to their gods, and you are invited, you'll eat of his sacrifice. Whore means to pursue faithless, unworthy, idolatrous desires. So when they pursue faithless desires and make sacrifices, the New Living Translation says offering, they make offering sacrifices to him. They offering sacrifices. Another definition for offering is something offered for sale or patronage, or a course of instruction or study. So when these people pursue faithless, unworthy, idolatrous desires, and they offer things for sale based on these faithful, unworthy desires, when they offer a course of instructions based on these faithless, unworthy desires, we will eat of it. Not we, the Israelites will eat of it. And another word for eat, or another definition for eat, is to ingest or consume. Consume meaning to enjoy eagerly or avidly. To understand this fully, refer to these two words again: covenant, treaty, which means agreement, and invite. Invite means to welcome. If the Israelites get into an agreeable state with these people, they will start to become welcoming. And once they start becoming welcoming, they're going to intermingle. They're going to embrace each other. And that's the very next thing that comes in verse 16. You take up their daughters for your sons, and their daughters whore after their gods, and make your sons whore after their gods. So when your sons marry their daughters, they'll go whoring. They will pursue faithless, unworthy, idolatrous desires, and they will make your children do it as well. Verse 17, make no molten gods. Verse 18 through 20, keep the feast of unleavened bread. Eat unleavened bread 7 days in the month of Abib. The first male child and animal is God's. Work 6 days. Make the seventh a day of rest. Observe the Feast of Weeks, the fresh fruit of wheat harvest, and the Feast of Ingathering. This is the second time. Verse 18 through 20 about eating. Verse 22 about eating. And we just talked about the sacrifice. They'll invite you and you'll eat of their sacrifice. This is the third time eating is being mentioned separately. All of your men shall appear before God 3 times a year. And God says to Moses that he'll give you territory and that no one will think to want your land when you appear before me when you leave, if you keep these traditions. Keep your culture strong. Remember your traditions. Keep your culture alive, and I'll protect you. Verse 25, don't offer the blood of my sacrifice with leaven, neither shall the sacrifice of the feast be left until morning. Bring me your fresh fruits. Don't see the kid in its mother's milk. Meaning don't boil a baby goat in his mother's milk. God told Moses to write the words down, that they are the terms of the covenant between God and Israel. Moses was up there 40 days and 40 nights. He didn't eat or drink. He wrote the covenant and the 10 Commandments on the tablets. In verse 29, they're called the 2 tables of testimony. Moses' skin was radiant as a result of talking with God. The Israelites were afraid to get close to him. Moses called everyone over, talked with them, sharing the instructions that God gave him. He put a veil over his face after he was done talking. When Moses went before the Lord, he removed the veil. And when he came out, when he finished speaking with them, he put the veil over his face. But when he went in to speak with the Lord, he would remove the veil. So he removed the veil to talk to the people of Israel, and he also removed it when he went to talk to the Lord. But that was a bit more challenging for me to get through. But I will leave the 2 sources, or the two websites that I went to. Thank you for watching up until this point. And the next upload will be Exodus chapter 35.